Laser projections on buildings and laser mapping has been one of those laser elements that's always excited me, because way back in October of 1990, my very first show, professional laser show, was actually laser advertising onto the side of a huge building in London. And ever since then, it's always intrigued me. And I've always wondered why people don't do it more often. And so I thought it was a topic that was very interesting to many people. And I am joined today by an expert in laser projection on buildings. Let me introduce you and welcome to Argon TV to Tim Walsh, who's president of Laser Spectacles. Tim, welcome to Argon TV.
Thank you, Tim. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's excellent. And it was very strange because about 3 or 4 days ago, I was reading a copy of The Laserist. And just here it says, lighting buildings with laser light. And I went to the article and I found it was written by you. So this inspired me to get in touch with you and to talk to you about laser projection on buildings. But before we go there, before we go into that topic, I thought it'd be kind of cool just to meet you a little bit and get to know you first, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, sure. Let's do it.
Cool. So I've actually known of you for about 25 or 30 years. So I know you go way back. And if we go back to those early days, how did you actually get started in laser?
Well, I was a music composition major in college, but never quite satisfied with music. I was always dabbling in film, working with dancers, and making weird electronic music, stuff like that. And somehow I got in touch with some businessmen in town who had started a company called Laser Creations, and they were going to produce a laser show derived from the laserium idea of things and install it in planetariums. And they were looking for a musician to run their shows. They felt it was very important that somebody know how to react music. And so I became their laserist.
That's interesting.
Yes.
So when was that? What year was that we're talking about?
That was 76, 77, something like that.
Wow.
And as soon as that happened, I pretty much stopped paying attention to school, although I graduated. I got a degree, a Bachelor of Music in Composition. And we did some planetariums. The Fort Worth Planetarium in Texas was a notable one. Did some tour dates and stuff like that. And then after that, I dove back into music when I started the band Brave Combo, the nuclear polka band of Texas. I bet you're surprised to hear that, huh?
Well, actually, I was researching you earlier, and I was going to ask you about that. Like, what the hell is that?
Well, along the way, I supported myself in a variety of ways. I decided not to do the laser thing for these guys because I didn't have a car and I was going to have to travel and stuff like that. So I worked at the university where I went to school in food service. I did catering. I had a job making hamburgers. And also I got the job of music, of accompaniment for the dance department. And in fact, I became the guy in charge of all the musicians who accompanied the dancers at their classes. And I hired and fired everybody. So I hired this one guy to play for the ballet classes because he could improvise very, very well, ballet type music. And we hit it off. His name was Carl Finch. And he said, man, why don't you bring your clarinet? And we'll do some jamming. And we started playing polkas. And the next thing you know, we had a following and a band. And it wasn't just a little thing. I mean, we got interviewed in Rolling Stone. We toured up to New York. We toured all over the country playing nuclear polka because this was the era of punks. Punk music and new wave back in it was 79 when we started the band was really hot. And you know, if you want to make yourself unique, you kind of go the opposite direction of what everybody's doing. So we went to those punk clubs and played polkas.
And
And
well,
that was
1979, I was just leaving school.
and so, but we weren't just doing it for a joke. We actually liked the music, and to this day, polka is probably my favorite kind of music. And actually, I left the band in '83 and went back into lasers, working for Laser Creations again. But the band has gone on, and I still play with them as much as I can, and got 2 Grammys for Best Polka Album. So we were definitely serious polka musicians and taking it to the punks and the new wavers back then.
That's an amazing story. And I think it's so interesting to hear the stories of people who have been involved in lasers and this kind of work for so long, and the other things that they do. I should have asked you to play for us instead of doing this interview. So that's going back quite a while. And at what stage of all this did laser spectacles come into the scene?
Okay, so 1983, Laser Creations got the Houston Planetarium, offered me a full-time job, running the show, programming shows, doing everything. And I thought, I never intended to be just a saxophone player. I had bigger ambitions than that. And I said, I'm going to do it. So I moved to Houston, quit the band, and did laser shows full-time since then. And after 2 years of that, in 1985, it was clear that I was getting paid, but the investors were not getting paid. So we made a deal for the equipment, and that's when I started Laser Spectacles.
Well, and why did you call it Laser Spectacles?
Because there was another guy in town doing laser shows in Houston, and I went to see, it offered me a job too, see one of his shows, and I didn't like it, and I thought, this is nothing. If I make a show, I want it to be a spectacle. I'm gonna start a company and call it Laser Spectacles, because that's what it needs to be.
That's really cool story. Inspired by another company. So that's great. And then as you went on in the career, you also became involved with ILDA, and you were president for a while with ILDA. Is that correct?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I was at the very first meeting of ILDA at 1986, before it was even called ILDA, and I was involved in coming up with the name. And as a matter of fact, I made an audio recording of that meeting, and you can find the recording on the ILDA website. When I told Patrick I had a recording of the first meeting, he said, "This is like somebody coming back from the Stone Age with documentation of what happened." And I mean, it's pretty incredible if you listen to it. The whole concept took an hour of meeting, and Ron Goldstein of Laser ran it and brought everybody together. But he was very open to everybody's ideas, and it really was a wonderful experience. And then in '93, I volunteered to bring all the laser equipment to the conventions to make us actually have laser shows there, because up until then it's just been mainly video and a few small projectors. And that was the main complaint of everybody, was that, well, we all come to this convention and there's no lasers. So Steve Hemmenover was president then, and he had a big push for what can everybody do to contribute to make ILDA better. And that was my idea. So, okay, I'm going to bring the equipment and set it up, and we're going to have lasers. And also that same year, John Goss retired as awards chairman. And when he said, okay, I was on the awards committee because I was bringing the lasers. And he said, okay, who wants to be awards chairman? And believe it or not, everybody else took a step backwards, and I took a step forward. So
you were kind of volunteered.
Yeah. So for many years I did that. And then of course, in China in 2007, I became president of ILDA and was there for 4 years. And then to this day, of course, I go to ILDA, and now I always volunteer to be the MC, the host, who gives out the awards and kind of, pulls it all together.
Yeah,
it's fun.
Yeah, very sweet. And I've been involved in laser not as long as you, but it's been quite a while. It's like 25 or 30 years now. And I kind of miss those good old days, because it was kind of Wild West and a bit more fun, but not quite so safe as it is now. And talking about safety, you also did become a laser safety officer, if I'm right.
Well, yeah, I had to because in Texas we had the Bureau of Radiation Control, and back then, in the good old days, they were very active, and you had to have credentials and show them that you knew what you were doing. So we actually were inspected practically every show. And I also kind of miss those days because basically you had a one or two lasers that put out a beam, and you had to figure out what to do with it. And so I enjoyed designing my own equipment, coming up with my own ways to do things and make effects that I would think up. And now it's just you're putting a bunch of boxes everywhere that spit the beams out. So it's a little bit different now, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things I've noticed over the last 3 or 4 weeks as I've been connecting with more and more laserists from around the world is there seems to be this big transition of lighting designers coming into laser, and many of them don't really understand that there's a need for laser safety, and they I'm finding that quite a lot of them don't really understand the equipment, and you know that they should be trained in laser safety at all. I had this discussion with Roberta McHatton a few weeks ago, who's also a laser safety officer, and I think it's something there's a big opportunity for education of these lighting designers. And it's quite good to see the transition between the two groups of people, but they're very different forms of light. Have you any comments for these guys? Any recommendations, like if they're coming into laser, what's the one thing that they should specifically do?
I'd say learn, as far as safety, learn how little of a laser beam it takes to light up a dollar bill and set it on fire. And that will be something to keep in mind, because if I run into a laser beam and I'm not sure how powerful it is, I always whip out a dollar bill and see if it starts the fire. And that's usually at about 500 milliwatts.
Well, that's a really good place to start. So get your dollar bills out and I will accept any burnt dollar bills after that. So we've been talking so far with Tim Walsh from Laser Spectacles about how he got started in the laser industry. And in a moment, we're going to talk about laser projection on buildings. We'll be back in just a moment. So welcome back to Argon TV. I'm really excited because I'm talking today to Tim Walsh, president of Laser Spectacles, and we are talking about laser projections on buildings. So when was your very first laser projection on building?
Oh gosh, I think it was in probably 93. I did a show at the Walton Arts Center in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And I'm pretty sure we did a Pink Floyd laser show on the back of their building.
Cool. That sounds great. Nothing like a bit of laser and a bit of Pink Floyd combined in one evening.
Exactly.
Always a good thing. And if you can throw in a couple of beers, it's even better. And what's the process? If a client calls you up and says, I want to do a laser projection onto my building, what's the process you go through? How different is it to a normal laser show setup?
Really, it's not different. It's just in the approach. I think it started with me when I worked on the county courthouse in Wharton, Texas, a few years ago. And I could have just projected the images on the courthouse, but I thought, you know, each window has its own place and its own little archway above it. And there's these little lines that go down the courthouse, and I want to take advantage of all this. So I went there and took some pictures and started working with the photos in my studio, projected the photos on the wall. And then when I went there and actually set up the show and aligned everything, and it worked really, really well, I thought, wow, you know, this is really something. And then they, of course, hired me for the next year and the next year. So in the course of those 3 years, I refined what I was doing and found some things that bothered me just in the alignment and things like that, and figured it out. And then one thing leads to another. And now, whenever I make a proposal for someone, one of the first things I do is say, are there any buildings in the area? And at least one package that I offer them includes projection on the buildings. And that's usually the higher priced one because it takes a lot of time.
Yeah, what I mean, so you get the photo, you project it onto the wall, and then you overlay laser onto it. Kind of how much time are we talking about from when you start to when you actually get to the building?
Oh, I mean, it's different for everybody. But if we take like project I did, the Nebraska Sesquicentennial for the Nebraska State Capitol in Lincoln, I think we did, we talked the end of June, and then I actually did some preliminary programming and went up there in mid-August and did a test, and to make sure they liked it, because it was still, I hadn't done this very much. And then the actual show was 4 weeks later. So it was a process that took probably 2 months total.
Oh, it's quite a long time. And is there like any obstacles, any buildings that you cannot project onto, or is there a best quality surface, or what's the SOP?
Well, I won't project on buildings that have people in them. So if I find out it's an apartment building or a hotel and that there are going to be people in the rooms, I don't even want to go there. It needs to be a business type building that's empty at night, and we can feel safe projecting on it with high power lasers. And that's about the only restriction I see, because the more complex the building gets, then the more fun it is for me. If it's just a blank white wall, of course, that's wonderful too in its own way, because that's a perfect projection screen with no wrinkles or anything. And you don't have to spend any time to set it up, it's just there. But once you get into architectural details and things like that, that's when it gets interesting. So usually the older the building is, the more ornate and interesting they are to me.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thought, that you don't want to project onto hotels. I actually did a show in Manila where the client is an ocean park style client, and they actually have a hotel there. And halfway through the show, one of the guests came back into the hotel room and turned the light on, and was standing in front of the window naked. And everyone's banging on his door, and he won't answer the door. And it was quite an
No.
interesting show.
Hey, he paid for the room. He can do whatever he wants.
That's what he said. He actually, in his defense, he did say that. So that was quite funny. So that's something that I might look out for again in the future. Yeah. So one of the other things that I found was that glass buildings don't work very well either, because the laser can just penetrate right through the glass.
Yes, I should have said that. You're correct. Glass is a problem.
Yeah, and then I saw some of the photos in the Laserist magazines that some of your buildings you were working on were curved buildings, like domes and everything. Does that have a different element to it because it's not flat? Or does it make it more fun?
I think it makes it more fun. It's interesting because if you do it with one projector, it's very simple. You just compress the whole thing into a two-dimensional plane and just treat them all as curves on a 2D surface. So, but then I did that one year. The next year I said, well, I want to have two projectors so I can wrap around the building more. And that proved to be much more difficult and taken much more work to make it look seamless, where the lasers actually come together. But it's still an interesting exercise.
Yeah, and do you need any special or extra licenses or permits or anything like that to do it on buildings?
Not that I've heard of. I've done some work on buildings. We did some in Houston when they had the Super Bowl there. I think it was 2004 or something like that. And we had to get permission from the building owner to project across the street on his building. So that happens sometimes. But usually it's not a problem, because the people with the building want me to project on the building because they're my clients, something like that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm fascinated by all of this. And then lastly, if someone was actually thinking about going into laser projection on buildings, what advice would you give them?
Oh, find out, you have to just start doing it and see what you like. And then follow your nose and make sure if you do another building that you can build upon your knowledge and come up with new things for each building and kind of get a library of your whole approach to it. So for me, it's I have to know how does it fit in my projection zone? How is my projection zone aligned to the building? Are my verticals all going to be squared off? So if I draw a vertical line anywhere on the building, it's going to be lined up. Things like that. Once you get a library of working like that, then it saves time in the future.
And what software are you using to do your work?
I use the LaserGraph DSP by Laser Animation Solinger from Berlin.
Okay, I've heard of it, but I've never used it. So that's interesting.
Oh, well, we could do a whole nother interview on just that.
Well, let's book it right now. Yeah, definitely. Actually, one of the things I do want to talk about in the future is the different versions of software that we can use for laser programming, because there's quite a few around. So I will hold you to that. I was going to say the other advice that we could give someone is to book you.
Okay. Well, sure. Yeah.
I think if I was going to do really complex laser projection on buildings, I would want an expert with me as I begin it and get to learn it.
I see. Good idea. Yes.
So in a moment, we're going to come back and we'll find out all your contact details so people can do just that. But let's just take another quick break. We'll be back in a moment. I'm talking to Tim Walsh, president of Laser Spectacles. We'll be back in just a moment. So welcome back to ArgonTV. This is Tim Bennett, and I'm talking with Tim Walsh, president of Laser Spectacles, and we have been talking about laser projections on buildings. So just now I was talking about what I would do is if I had a really complex building to do, I would contact Tim Walsh and ask him to come and help me. So if people wanted to do that, how did they get in touch with you?
Well, I'll give you the website, and then I'll give you my email, and then I'll give you my phone number. And the website is www.laserspectacles.com, and that's spelled LaserSpectacles.com. And then my email is laserinfo@laserspectacles.com, LASERINFO@laserspectacles.com. And our phone number here is area code, this is in Texas, 512-392-4600.
Awesome. So the phone lines are ready, waiting to take all those calls. And so lastly, one of the questions, this is like one of my favorite parts because there's so many successful people that I've talked to and successful in different ways. I always like to ask, what is success?
You're going to have to say it again because you kind of zoomed out there.
Okay.
Secret?
Yes. What is your secret to success?
The secret is that you don't give up. Once you have a vision that you think you can achieve, then you don't give up until you get that. So for right now, I'm spending my time during this lockdown time learning 3ds Max, because I've always had this program for the LaserGraph DSP called ProTize Max. and never really used it. I mean, hey, everybody goes on, makes a three-dimensional logo and gets it to rotate, and you render it out to laser, and then you have a nice, smooth, rotating logo. But that just scratches the surface of the whole thing. So I'm not giving up. I'm going to create animations using 3ds Max for lasers, and especially character animation. And I didn't realize until, I mean, I've been working on this now for 3 or 4 months. And when I did the entry for the ILDA Connected contest, I got something done, but what it really taught me was what I don't know. And sometimes you need to work to a deadline, and then you realize, oh my God, I really am in here over my head. I don't know what I'm doing, but you just got to get it done. And then now I'm taking the time, since I know what I need to learn, to actually learn it at a pace that I can learn it at. But that's the thing. You may feel like you're overwhelmed, but just don't give up.
And that is awesome, because last Friday, I think it was, I was talking to, I don't know if you know him, Peter Jan Roysch from the
Sure.
Netherlands.
Yes,
He and I did a chat just like this on ArgonTV last week, and I'm just producing it all at the moment. And he has the most amazing way of doing animation I've ever seen. Like, wow. And he uses 3D Studio Max as well. So that'll be coming out on tomorrow, Wednesday, I think. And it was fascinating as well. So I think it's great that people around the world, including yourself, are taking the time during this crazy period where we are suffering lockdowns to find and do new things. I think that's brilliant. But I do don't give up. I want to thank you for being here with me today on Argon TV and sharing your story. I'm sure we could actually talk for 3 or 4 hours about things that have happened to both of us over the last 25 or 30 years.
yes.
And it's absolutely been fantastic to finally meet the man behind the name, because I've heard your name so many times. And it's good to meet you today. And I appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us. So thank you for being here at Argon TV.
You're welcome.
So great. This is Tim Bennett. I have been with the one and only Tim Walsh, president of Laser Spectacles, and we have been talking about laser projections on buildings. I look forward to seeing you again in another episode very soon of Argon TV.